Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It's the Brad and John Show, and it starts right now. The web address is bjshow.co. John, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning, Brad. I love the lead into us, that commercial that said more news than you could shake a tongue at? Or wait, more music than you could shake a tongue at for Gene Simmons?
Yes.
We're more news than you could shake a fist at.
I was going to say, be careful what you say there.
Yeah, no, shake a fist at, Brad, you know.
Okay, I'll take that. 27th of December, it's Wednesday. Yesterday was first day back after Christmas. Once again, for some, my frustration is how many emails did I send out yesterday? I got the autoresponders. We're taking the week off. We'll be back on January 3rd or something like that.
That's right. Just kick it to next year, Brad. Just punt to next year. That's the strategy.
I've got to ask you a question, you being a fellow Hazelwood High School kind of person. But let's do the top three. John is the man for 20-plus years, every single day, 365, and in leap year, 366 days a year. He puts up a list of all the news articles that are worthy of notation by the political kind of folks. In other words, if somebody is doing something in Jefferson City that's sort of weird or odd, John's got it on his list. And we start the show off with going John's top three list. And the number three story on John's top three this morning from johncombest.com is...
The number three story starts with a fellow St. Louis morning show here on 97.1 FM. The Mark Cox morning show had former state senator John Lamping, who we've talked about on the show before. A former Republican state senator, used to represent Ladue, now lives in Augusta. So he's definitely in our listening area. He had a really interesting take on the governor's race. And I think the most interesting thing he had to say was he was talking about the school choice issue. And he brought up a pretty good point, which is, Republicans could get all of this done because they have the supermajority. But one of the angles that you could take if you're a candidate running for statewide office this year, you kind of hope that the legislation doesn't pass in 2024's session, because then when you're campaigning around the state, you can say, elect me and I'll get it done. I'll be the deal maker that actually gets school choice done. So Lamping made that point about Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, how Kehoe could use that, how Secretary of State candidate Caleb Rowden, who is the leader of Republicans in the Senate, also makes that case, and also brings up, really underscores, Brad, one of your points, which is one of the reasons why school choice doesn't pass is because as Republicans built their supermajority over the last 20 years, they go into these rural communities and they recruit people who are former school superintendents, people of the school bureaucracy. And those folks are generally pretty hesitant to do anything that tampers with their local rural districts. So John underscored that point. One of my favorite things, by the way, Brad, of your previous show, the BS show with our friend Shelley Barr, when I was a listener, was that you acknowledged that other radio stations existed. And I think one of the sillier things about the radio industry is that so many radio shows don't acknowledge that other radio shows even exist. And I think that's so insulting to the listeners,
Well, yeah, so, we were told, some of my bosses were told we never, ever, 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 ever mention another radio station. And because the idea being is if you do it instantly, well, I should be listening to that, Now,
which, by the way, folks should be listening to us live. And then if later on in the day you want to listen to, or at nighttime, or you're in the car, you want to listen to a couple quick seconds of another show. By the way, Brad, if you go to my website today, Brad and I have talked about this before on the show. If you go to johncombest.com today, you'll find all the timestamps. So John talks on the show, John Lamping talks on the show for 12 minutes. If you only care about the one piece where he talks about school choice, I have the timestamp. You can go listen to just that 1 minute.
Interesting. Let me make one correction to what I said. Back in the day, you didn't mention other radio stations. Now that the rules have changed and there's companies that own multiple stations, like, for example, if you listen to 97.1 last week, for last couple of weeks right before Christmas, they were promoting the fact that you could listen to Christmas music on KZK.
Oh, that's right.
Which is one of their stations. But they would never talk about KSHE, which is owned by another company, or I'm trying to think what the other ways that's the H guys. I can always remember the name of that company. Isn't that weird? I got a mental block with that. And then you've got they would never mention anybody on iHeart. They would never talk anything about the Bull or stuff like that.
Sure.
Because
that's but we're not threatened by other stations.
Well, see,
that's the difference between us and other people. Well, specifically you, Brad. I mean, you set that example for many years.
Well, but here's the thing: if you and this may sound corny, but if people are expected to have someone that listens to that is not afraid of doing things that nobody else would do, that's all about me. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that
absolutely,
because
of course it is.
Well, but not only that, you talk about other radio stations. It used to always drive me nuts. And this is a common practice in the television business. Let's say the station we're on right now, we did a fundraiser and we raised $1 million for cancer, okay? Cancer prevention or cancer, research, things like that. And we had a crowd of hundreds of people that showed up, and we had this successful, unbelievable promotion. And all the TV stations were there to cover it. The read over the voice over the video of people showing up and things like that. A local radio station today raised them, and they would never mention the station or the call letters.
That's absurd to me. And it's so petty too. Well, and I know that call comes from the top at times, but come on.
Well, but once again, you're not being a good journalist because you're not telling, that would be like a local politician today was found in the backseat of a car with a prostitute, and they had 10 kilos of cocaine in the trunk. People would go, okay, who's the local politician?
Yeah, I know, exactly.
I mean,
so that was a great clip from Mark Cox's show 97.1, which airs at the same time we do. But don't switch channels, guys. Just keep listening to us. The number 2 story is that Brad's pal, Mark McCloskey, an appeals court says that Mark McCloskey will not get his guns back.
Really?
From the infamous photo opportunity from the year of 2020 when Mark McCloskey and his wife were defending their home from a pack of marauding protesters in a gated community. The appeals court says Mark cannot get his guns back. Mark McCloskey says he will appeal this to the Missouri Supreme Court.
Do you understand this? I understand why the courts are doing it. I think it's a bias against him.
Of course it is. Yeah, but it's political.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if anybody...
Because...
and the court ruling, I believe, said something to the effect of... Now, the governor pardoned Mark McCloskey. So the court's ruling was that the governor's pardon essentially erases the conviction, but not the fact that Mark should be penalized. So if that makes any sense.
Well,
and again, I'm not an attorney, so it makes no sense to me.
Run that back again.
Is that what Governor Parson did frees McCloskey from any sort of, going to jail or whatever the conviction was. So Mark is no longer considered, eligible for or that he won't go to jail. Essentially, he's pardoned of the crime, but that whatever happened in commission of him getting arrested and him getting, his guns taken away, that's not nullified by the governor's pardon.
So even though the governor pardoned him, he's still being punished.
Right. Well, Brad, come on. He's on the wrong side of the law. By the way, you can I just pulled the picture up of him, and my favorite thing about it is that pink shirt is that you just have a beautiful Brooks Brothers logo on that shirt. It says so much. And for folks who don't want to pay the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for their unique brand of reporting, can get around the paywall by clicking the link on my website.
Unique brand of reporting.
And the number 1 story today, Brad, is a feel-good story. Will make you feel great about living anywhere but St. Louis City. A young man, a young scholar, a 19-year-old, whose name is, I want to make sure I get this right, Marion Jameer Dukes, stole 37 of the St. Louis City Election Board's iPads that are used in elections, and was busted trying to sell one of them at a Walmart. So the St. Louis City Election Board, for their part, says there's nothing to worry about, and they place the blame for this theft exclusively on the building landlord, not on their own security measures.
Okay.
So and this young man, Marion Jameer Dukes, was apprehended breaking into cars this last Saturday before Christmas, the 2 days before Christmas, breaking into cars at the Galleria. So cops apprehended him and said, wait a minute, you're the guy that stole all the iPads from the St. Louis City Election Board. But no worries, Brad, because the election board says it's not their fault, it's the landlord's fault.
Well, hold on a minute. Okay, the Richmond Heights police arrest him. How did they already know how did they know he was the guy who stole the iPads?
I guess he was wanted in St. Louis City. And the other unique factor about this is that 2 days after this young man and two of his friends broke into the St. Louis City Election Board, they stole another $16,000 worth of electronic equipment from another nearby business in downtown St. Louis. So the cops were clearly looking for this guy. They had identified him. Excuse me. And Walmart, apparently, I didn't know this. You might know this, Brad, but Walmart has these kiosks where you go in and you can sell your used electronics.
Yeah.
So this guy took one of the stolen iPads in, and thankfully the kiosk worker or something happened where they were able to identify this as stolen. And so they looked at the security video. So they knew who this guy was, and then they busted him in. And he's admitted to both of the electronics thefts.
Okay, let's that's a great top story, because let's dissect that for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. First off, we talk about this thing with election fraud and the whole bit. Doesn't that scream of there's a problem with security for the election system when somebody can steal 16 of the iPads that are used at polling places? Doesn't that sort of...
But Brad, the city election board, and by the way, the guy who heads up the Democrats in St. Louis City, his last name is Borgmeyer. I wonder if he's related to your friend in St. Charles County.
Dan, the
if
mayor
Ben
of City of St.
Borgmeyer
Charles
is related to Dan Borgmeyer, not sure. But again, don't worry though, because the St. Louis City Election Board says it's all the landlord's fault.
But see, once again, I mean, that would be like, isn't there some kind of, discreet, unique, high-profile, security software loaded on those iPads?
There is, and they were so once the election board reported that these had been stolen, the company who administers the software turned off the software. So now a cynic, aka you and I, Brad, would say even when these are stolen, you could still access election information until the election board realizes that they're stolen.
Well,
so go ahead.
They may turn off, and you can do that. You being an iPhone guy, I being an iPhone guy, you can essentially, if somebody steals your phone, you can turn it off.
Yeah.
But still, I say you give that to a really good hacker, and he'll go, I can still get into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. And so, the interesting thing here is how can an election board just blame, I just think it looks really bad. Taking partisanship out of this, it looks bad for an election board to say that it's the landlord's fault for not doing enough with security. Like, eventually you just have to say, look, we're taking steps. This was obviously a huge error, and we're going to take steps to make sure this never happens again.
Okay, iPads are not that big, okay? They're very thin. You could buy one of those safes, wouldn't cost a lot of money, that you see like at the sporting goods stores that people put their guns in. You could probably put 500 iPads in that safe. You know what I'm saying? You could stack,
Brad,
stack,
I think
stack,
sometimes, though, despite all your years, Brad, working with government, sometimes you assign common sense and rationality to government offices.
I don't.
It's a fatal flaw in your argumentation.
There's lots of flaws in my argument. Go back to this for the whole election thing. Okay, once again, I'm not going to go down the road that Donald Trump's going down, or what was there, Kerry Lake, or I think that's like taking it to the extreme. But it's sort of like you can say that on a daily basis, there is some kind of fraud that's perpetrated upon the government on some level every single day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course there is. Wherever you have that huge amount of government money coming in for something, it's every time, Brad, again, let's go back to the Hazelwood School District. Every time I read a story about how any school district in the St. Louis area is issuing iPads or electronics, you think, man, the price for those on the street in Spanish Lake or Florissant or Blackjack has just decreased by 50%. I mean, it's true. You're going to have, and we've seen that for years, and talk to teachers in the Hazelwood School District who will tell you that. It's just little Jimmy's iPad suddenly grows legs and they just don't know what happened to it.
Well, I guess so. I mean, that's a very cynical look at modern day not modern day technology, but modern day educational systems where they're trying to introduce, obviously, the kids who are in school right now, especially the grade school and the middle school kids, their life is going to revolve around the internet and smart devices and smartphones and computers and laptops and, and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And it's to the point where you have to, it's just like, for example, there's a gap. And it was funny because of the fact that when my father was still alive, the gap was incredibly apparent. My dad was not a technical guy. But one day, I go over to his house, and what's he doing? He's building a computer. And I'm going,
oh, wow. How did he do that?
Well,
he built a lot of stuff. Like, he was a Renaissance man.
Well, but he was an electronics guy. And he went on, back in the day, he was a big mail order guy, and there was a company called Tiger Direct, which I bought stuff from.
Oh, I've heard of Tiger Direct.
I don't know. And he would go on their catalog, and he'd go on their 800 number, because obviously he didn't have a phone, and he would call the 800 number, and he'd order these parts. And the parts would show up at his house, and we got all the parts together, and he bought the software online. Not online. He bought it through Tiger Direct. So he's building. And you know what? It sort of bothers me because I had that computer after he passed away, and I can't remember what happened to it because obviously it's obsolete now. But so in other words, here was my dad at the time who was probably, I don't know, in his 70s. And he was, and the crazy part of it was, and someday I'll tell this whole crazy story. My dad was 2 years old when his father left. And he never saw his father until one crazy day. But his father was an interesting guy in that his father was a young man. And essentially, these were his grandparents. They were German farmers. And I guess it was Elizabeth the Great, who was the Tsar of Russia back in the 1800s. The Russians were notoriously bad farmers, and the Germans were notoriously good farmers. So she made this deal where she made a deal to a bunch of Germans. If they came to Russia, she would give them a huge plot of land that they could farm, but they had to bring some of the Russian farmers with them to show how the Germans did it. So that would be my great-grandparents immigrated to Russia. And as he said, the Russians then hated the Germans. So it didn't work very well because the Russians never learned anything from the Germans because the Russians never got close to the Germans. So my grandfather would have been like 15 or 16 years old, and he hated Russia. He left home, like 15, 16-year-old kid, went across Eastern Europe, went through Central Europe, ended up, I believe, either in France or England, got on a ship to the United States as like a 15-year-old kid, and went through Ellis Island. But
that's great.
But what happened?
That's an American dream story.
Well, but the crazy part of it is, he leaves my mother and his grandmother and at 2 years old, and my dad, grows up, goes to college, and when I think my dad was 33 or 34, he was working for a civil engineering firm, and one day he's at work, and the secretary, the receptionist, when they used to have those, comes running back and says, "See, Lee, some guy with a thick German accent just came up to the front desk and asked if you worked here." And I told him yes. And he says, "Tell him his father's in City Hospital and he's dying and he wants to see him." So my dad goes, "Okay." So he leaves work, goes down to City Hospital, checks at the front desk. Sure enough, there's a Zygmunt. That was my grandfather's first name, Zygmunt Hildebrand, who is on a certain floor. He goes to the room. There's his father, talks to his father. Hour later, he dies.
Wow.
And
at least he got to see him though, right?
So the deal was, my father was fascinated with trying to find out genealogy. He was trying to track his father and other relatives, and this is why I bought the computer. And he ended up going to Salt Lake City. I don't know if you know this or not. The Mormons have this incredible genealogy. I can't even say it.
Yeah, genealogy. I learned this from you, actually.
Right. They have this incredible genealogical database, and he couldn't find anything there. And probably, I don't know, maybe a month or two before he passed away, I went over to his house one day, and he was really down. And I said to him, what's going on? And he says, well, I've come to the end of the line. I thought he was like going, tell me he's going to die right there. But that wasn't it. I go, what do you mean? He says, well, I found out everything I need to know about my father. And it turned out that his father was an illegal immigrant, never became an American citizen in the United States, was very smart. Actually, to this day, you can find my grandfather's patents online. There's 2 of them online, that he developed these machine tools, and that all through his life, his father sometimes lived like 2 blocks away from him. And
yeah, I remember you telling me that. And he never knew.
He never knew. And his aunt...
They went to the same bar, didn't they?
His aunt owned a bar, Fritz's Fine Foods, on Broadway. And sometimes his aunt was sworn to secrecy, and sometimes my dad and his father were in the bar at the same time. Is
incredible? Imagine knowing that
Is
eventually.
that bizarre or what? I mean, it's just like, okay. It's like some crazy, weird movie story, stuff like that. Okay, we're way over time, and it's all my damn fault. I'm sorry.
You can't say damn, can you, Brad?
Yeah, I can say damn. We have to take a break. It is 7:23.